Good morning. My name is Monika Stodolska. I'm a professor in the Department of Recreation, Sport and Tourism at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Today we're in Douglas Park in Urbana, and I'm going to talk about some of the determinants of obesity epidemic among ethnic and racial minorities. In particular, we're going to focus on their physical activity levels. So first of all, we are going to look at some of the reasons why minorities don't participate in physical activity as much as non-Hispanic whites. And then we are going to look at the determinants of physical activity participation in minority neighborhoods. So as you know, obesity and overweight are a problem for the majority of Americans, but they are particularly high among ethnic and racial minorities. In fact, more than 81% of Mexican-American men and almost 80% of Mexican-American women are overweight or obese, which means that their BMI, body mass index, is larger than 25. The same is true for 70% of African-American men and 80% of African-American women. Again, their BMI is larger than 25. In addition to that, obesity starts very early in childhood among ethnic and racial minorities. So, why should we care about this problem of ethnic and racial minorities having this high rates of overweight and obesity? Well, let's look at the statistics. Today, about 1/3 of the American population is comprised of ethnic and racial minorities. About 16% of the American populations are Hispanics. About 12%, slightly more than 12% of the population are African Americans. But even if you look at the trends for the future, over the last 10 years, 14 years actually, between 2000 and 2010, minorities accounted for over 91% of the population growth in the United States. Which means that if you look 35 years from now, at the year of approximately 2050, non-Hispanic whites will comprise less than half of the American population, about 47%. As you know, obesity can be related to a number of factors. It can be genetics. Your mom, your dad were overweight, so chances are you have a pretty good chance that you're going to be overweight yourself. They can be related to, for example, your unhealthy dietary patterns, or they can be related to inadequate physical activity. And what happens is that physical activity among minority populations is particularly low. In fact, only about 18% of African Americans and about 15% of Hispanic Americans met the federal guidelines for physical activity participation. The same was true, for comparison purposes, for approximately 25% of non-Hispanic whites. Well, so let's look at the reasons. Why is physical activity participation among minorities so low? There can be a number of different explanations. First of all, socioeconomics. We know that Hispanics and African Americans are overrepresented in the lower socioeconomic strata. They make less than non-Hispanic whites and Asian Americans. As you know, physical activity participation may cost money. If you want to sign up your kids for a sports program, you need to pay a fee. If you want to go to a gym, again, you need to pay a fee. And a lot of minority populations don't have that kind of money to spend. Another reason can be their hard work. Many of them, again, they have physically strenuous employment. So after a whole day of work at the factory or an assembly line, last thing you want to do is to want to exercise in the gym. Well, another thing is, again, lack of time. Many of them, they have more than one job. And if you are so tired after a whole day of work, again, the last thing you want to do is to want to go to a park to exercise. Another reason can be cultural factors. The fact that there's a perception that my people just don't do it. You don't see anybody in the park participating in physical activity. Kids don't have role models. Teenagers, adults don't have anybody else to participate with them. There can also be a perception that, you know what, I don't have to be that skinny as that girl over there. It can be number of kids that you have. A lot of Hispanic women, especially first generation, they're concerned about leaving their kids in the care of the strangers. So again, this is a constraint to physical activity participation. And lastly, it can be a neighborhood where you live. And a lot of minorities, they live in densely populated inner city urban neighborhoods. And again, physical activity participation in a neighborhood like that is not very easy to accomplish. So let's look at those neighborhoods more carefully. What is happening? First of all, access to natural environments. In many minority neighborhoods, they lack sufficient access to quality natural environments. In fact, in one of the neighborhoods where my colleagues and I conducted research in Chicago, there were only 61 acres of parks for more than 91,000 population. There was one park where people participated in physical activity, similar to this one, 12.4 acres. Again, 91,000 population, which is pretty much the same as the population of Champaign and Urbana, where we are at right now. A lot of those parks that are available, they're not quality natural environments. There's a lot of trash, there's a lot of garbage, there's a lot of graffiti tagging everywhere. Some of the people said that those parks are more of an eyesore for the community and more of a wasteland than an environment where you would like to come in for a jog or, to exercise. Another reason is public transportation. Many of the parks in minority communities, they're surrounded by highways and they're not easily accessible to pedestrians or by public transportation. The minorities, a lot of them, they don't have the money to pay for the gas, or they don't have driver's license, so they don't have a car to access a park. Lack of understanding of the needs of minorities among recreation managers. Even though the population of minorities in the United States is increasing rapidly, many recreation managers are simply not used to having them in their neighborhoods. They don't know how to serve them best. They don't know what are their needs, what are their preferences, what are their constraints to physical activity participation. Another reason is lack of information. Well, how do you find out about opportunities for physical activity? Most of the people will just look online, look at the website. The fact is that a lot of minorities, they don't speak the language of the majority population. They don't speak English. And they don't access information the same way the majority of people do. So instead of putting the information on the website, the best way to access them could be for a radio station ad, or, for example, for a flyer distributed for schools or for churches or for community organizations. Well, another reason is high rates of crime in minority neighborhoods. My colleagues and I, again, did a couple of research projects on how crime constrains physical activity participation among teenagers in Latino neighborhoods. And what we found out is that the more children were afraid of crime, the less likely they were to participate in physical activity and outdoor recreation. They were afraid to go to park. They couldn't go out at night. They couldn't participate in sports programs that ended after 3 p.m. when, it gets dark in Chicago pretty early in winter. So that again constrained their participation in physical activity. Also, there are what we call invisible racial lines that divide some of the neighborhoods. As you may know, Chicago, for example, is a very racially segregated city. Some of the neighborhoods can be 98% African American. Another neighborhood just down the street is going to be 85% Hispanic. Some park, like for example this park, can be labeled as African American Park. Another one across the street can be labeled as Hispanic Park, based on who is the majority of the users and who are the people who work in the recreation center. So if you're Hispanic, you're going to be reluctant to cross that street to go to an African American park and vice versa. Thank you.